This is an introductory video to the Financial Accounting Standards Board, FASB, conceptual framework. Now, to understand what the conceptual framework does is we kind of have to look back at the history of accounting. And accounting's a lot like law in that there's no scientific absolutes in accounting or law. When we create a law, it is a law, like it or don't like it. When we create accounting principles, or when accounting principles have been created in the past, those were the accounting principles. And just like the law, accounting principles can change based upon the changes in society and the changes in business structures and so forth. So over the years, the rules for accounting, generally accepted accounting principles, have changed depending again upon what was important in society and business at the time. Well, in the 1970s, when the FASB was formed, the FASB knew this, and what the FASB wanted to do was create some form of foundation, just like when the United States was created. We created a framework for our laws called the U.S. Constitution, and the FASB wanted to create a framework which would be considered the accounting constitution for financial reporting, and that's where the idea of the accounting conceptual framework came from. So to keep accounting consistent and the concepts consistent, the FASB would create generally accepted accounting principles within the constraints of this conceptual framework. So let's go ahead and take a look at the initiation of this conceptual framework. Now, we're going to take a look at the bottom part of this slide first. What you see is, of course, this is a 10,000-foot view, but the FASB finds that there's a need for some type of portion of the conceptual framework. The FASB has a large research staff which researches the issues involved with that, and based upon that, then that information is sent out for public comment, and then the FASB gets back that comment and determines whether or not public comment, whether items should be incorporated or not. And in the end, they end up issuing what we call a Statement of Financial Accounting Concepts, or SFAC. And you can see the progression from 1978 through 2010 of all the issuances of statements of financial accounting concepts. And what you also need to understand is that the SFACs are not necessarily standalone, they're interrelated, and in some cases they amend portions to other SFACs, or in some cases they basically supersede previous SFACs. You can see the first SFAC 1 through SFAC 4 have been superseded. So now the conceptual framework is contained in SFAC 5 through 8. So that's now the total conceptual framework. Now you'll also notice that these SFACs are not issued at regular intervals. They're issued on as a project by project basis, in other words, as needed, and it goes through a project review, research review, public comment, and so forth, and when it's ready to be issued, the SFAC is issued. Now, the last one was issued in 2010, and this does not imply this is the last SFAC, or the last change or amendment to the conceptual framework. All it means is that the FASB is working on additional concepts, conceptual concepts, and they're going to be issuing SFA 9 and so forth as time goes on, which again may amend a part of the conceptual framework, may supersede it, or just may add to the conceptual framework. Now, if you get down to one of the formal definitions of what the conceptual framework does is it consists of criteria, in other words, framework criteria that guide the identification and selection of economic phenomena to be recognized, measured, and communicated for financial reporting purposes. In essence, the framework provides the Financial Accounting Standards Board with the foundation for setting standards and concepts to use as tools for resolving accounting and reporting questions. So the framework itself, the SFAC, does not prescribe, is not a generally accepted accounting principle. On the other hand, the SFAC provides the basis for creating generally accepted accounting principles. And I will also mention one other thing at this point. When we talk about statements of financial accounting concepts, those are SFACs. Now, in the past, what has happened is the Accounting Standards Board, or the FASB, had issued what we call statements of financial accounting standards, which are GAAP, the rules of accounting. So don't get that confused. If you hear the word SFAS, that's generally accepted accounting principles. SFAC is the concepts that help generate SFASs. Okay, now if we take a look at the conceptual framework, we go to the next slide. They're really separated into 7 major areas. And the first major area is basically the area that drives all the other areas. And this is the objective of financial reporting. Before we decide what we need, what is information and so forth, what to communicate, we need to understand what is the objective of financial reporting, and that's going to be the first subject area we're going to go over. It also prescribes the qualitative characteristics of useful information. It also talks about the elements, in other words, the syntax, the common type of definitions that we utilize to communicate information. It also goes through the recognition and measurement concepts of how do we recognize events and how do we measure them. And then lastly, it goes into what I call the traditional accounting concepts. And that'll be going under the underlying assumptions of accounting, accounting principles, and constraints within accounting. So let's now take a look at the objective of financial reporting. Okay, now we see the objective of financial reporting, and the first thing is we're going to start off with provide information to stakeholders. Okay, now let's stop at that and say, when I say stakeholders, what I'm talking about are third parties. In other words, these stakeholders have some type of stake in the process. They have some type of interest in the process, or possibly even some type of ownership, or they're creditors or so forth. So they have they're our stakeholders, but they don't have direct access to the information that management has. They don't have access to the books and the records, so they have to rely upon this financial reporting information as third parties. And when I talk about stakeholders, I'm talking about, we'll go down here to the middle part of the slide, that includes, but it's not limited to, people such as investors, creditors, employees, unions, customers, suppliers, government, and financial intermediaries. When I say financial intermediaries, that could be like a stockbroker or a financial advisor or analyst, individuals like that. So the thing is, the objective of financial reporting is to provide information, and this is information for the decision-making process for these third parties. So provide information to stakeholders that is useful for decision making. So we don't want to provide information that is not useful. We want to provide information that is useful. Also, it helps our stakeholders predict and assess present and future cash flows. And as I think everybody understands here, is cash flow is the lifeblood of the business, and without cash flow, the business will basically well, go away and die, become bankrupt. It also provides the stakeholders information, again, for decision making for economic resources, the claims to those resources, and changes in those resources and claims. So that's a primary objective of financial reporting. Now, also, the conceptual framework also talks about limitations. And when we talk about the conceptual framework, sometimes they will talk about it as general purpose financial reporting, GPFR, down here. So there's some interesting limitations that are mentioned in the conceptual framework. The first one being the information that comes out of the information that is produced is not necessarily sufficient to determine the value of the entity. As accountants, we try to create some type of estimate of the value of a company, but the truth of the matter is we are constrained by things such as cost. We don't value employees and different intrinsic things like that. So there's a lot of things that may add value or may detract from the value of the company that aren't necessarily recorded in the financial records of the company. So the first thing is we have to understand these financial statements that we issue are not sufficient to determine the value of the company. Number two, we have to understand that the financial statements are based upon real stuff, actual transactions. And what I mean by that, it's basically transactions between willing buyers and willing sellers, which is a good way of objectively measuring the value of a transaction. But we also have to understand that a great amount of financial information that we use is based upon estimates, accruals, deferrals, things like that. It's also based upon judgments, which are part of estimates, and also models. As we get into fair value accounting, you'll see in some cases that values in the financial statements are established not necessarily by actual dollars or so forth, but they're established by some form of modeling. Thirdly, the financial statements cannot satisfy the needs of all potential stakeholders. And the reason for that is we can't anticipate every possible need. We have to basically say they can meet us. We can meet the needs of a set of stakeholders, which we talk about here in this under the stakeholders box. But we can't figure. We really can't determine everybody's needs. The other thing is that with our objective of financial reporting, we do assume that the users, the stakeholders, have a fundamental knowledge of financial accounting principles. That doesn't mean they have to be a CPA or a financial analyst or Warren Buffett. What it does mean is that they just need to have a fundamental understanding of the information there. They don't have to have an expert understanding. Okay, with that, let's go on to 3 multiple choice questions. These questions are a representation of some of the questions you could see on the CPA exam regarding basically the conceptual framework of the purpose, the objectives of the conceptual framework. So let's take a look at number 1. And again, the process for this is to stop your video on number 1, consider the question and the 4 possible answers, and then when you're done, come up with your answer, go ahead and restart the video and look at the answer slide. Now also, I will remind you, in a lot of cases there's no such thing as a perfect answer. You have to come up with the best out of the 4 answers, or you may have several answers that are really, really good. You have to come up with the best out of those really, really good answers. So keep that in mind. It's not necessarily easy. Sometimes it's multiple choice questions. So the question number 1 is, which of the following is true about the objective of general purpose financial reporting? So again, please stop the video. When you make your choice, go ahead and restart the video and view the answer slide. Okay, number 1, which of the following is true about the objective of general purpose financial reporting? In this case, the answer is D. It provides information as to the entity's economic resources and claims against those resources. If you'll remember from our objective slide, one of the where it's to provide information and about economic resources, the claims to those resources, and changes in resources and claims. Now, again, this does not exactly mirror the statement I made in this blue box here, but again, you want to pick out the correct answer, and this is the closest. Okay, A is focused on manufacturing rather than retail, and what we need to understand with the conceptual framework, no, it's not focused on any particular type of industry. It's focused on the results of the entity itself. B, provides information that is useful only for investment professionals, and that's not true. As I mentioned, you don't have to, the information is not written only so it can only be understood by a CPA or an investment analyst. It's basically, it's going to be useful to this group of stakeholders who have some form of fundamental information. C, it directly measures management performance. No, it measures the performance of the entity. It does not directly measure management's performance. So that's number one. Let's go on to number two. Number two, which of the following statements is true regarding the FASB conceptual framework? Again, you're given 4 answers, and select what you consider to be the best answer, or stop the video, then select what you consider to be the best answer, and then restart the video when you made your answer and look at the answer slide. Number two, which of the following statements is true regarding the FASB conceptual framework? And the answer here is C. It provides an underlying foundation for a gap. And if we take a look at the individual answers, I'm going to respond to A and C at the same time. Okay, the conceptual framework is not gap. It provides the underlying foundation for a gap, so it is not gap itself. B, it is used to interpret financial information by investors, and we know that the conceptual framework provides a basis for creating the e-accounting rules. So in effect, qualitative characteristics are not adequate for interpreting financial information. D, then, it's revised and reissued annually. Again, while parts of the framework may be revised periodically, there is no timetable that requires revision to any part of the framework unless it's written into a program by the FASB. We're saying we're going to have this particular concept statement done at this particular date. Okay, let's try the final question, number 3. Number 3, according to the FASB's conceptual framework, the objective of general purpose financial reporting is based upon, again, you're given 4 choices. Please stop your video, determine what you consider to be the correct choice, and then restart your video. Number 3, according to the FASB's conceptual framework, the objective of general purpose financial reporting is based upon B, the needs of the users. And again, we go back to the slide about the objectives of financial reporting, and we talk about basically the needs of the users being third parties, external user groups, and that includes, for example, investors, creditors, employees, and so forth. So that's the answer to question number 3. That's the end of the question for this series of videos. You can go on to the next video, which will talk about characteristics of useful information as defined within the conceptual framework. So thank you for your time, and see you in the next video.